Hello, everyone. This is Nathan here, and I am making this video to help anyone out. If you missed the 101 last Wednesday and you wanted to get caught up, you can watch this video. I'm not sure how long it will be. I'm hoping I can get all of this information in like 30 or maybe 40 minutes. So we're going to breeze through it really quickly. Tonight, what we're going to be looking at is kind of the underlying philosophy for technology and how Christians should approach technology. All right, let's just dive in and come along for the ride here. All right, here is our introduction. What I like to do when I'm introducing a subject like this is I like to start with definitions. So we're going to start with a definition of technology. A lot of us in our heads probably have an idea. When we hear that word, we might think of like a computer or whatever it is that you think of. But I kind of want to give us some definitions so that we know what we're talking about. And as you're watching this video and you see on this screen here, this is from the Oxford Dictionary, and I'm really going to be just focusing on 1A. I'll read this here. The practical application of knowledge, especially in a particular area. So what that means is just if you have knowledge about any given area, and then you take that knowledge and you figure out like how to apply it somewhere, how to work with it and use it. Here's an example. Right now you're looking at a picture of a horse. Now, this horse you can see has a saddle, it has a bridle on it, it's got a bit, it's got reins, right? Now, what happened is somewhere in the distant past, and I didn't research this in my preparation for this class, but somewhere in the past, someone said, hey, if we make a seat and put it on this horse, then that will make it so much easier for us to ride. And if we put a bit in its mouth and, make this contraption to put on its head and have reins, we can control it and ride it a lot better. So what happened is somebody who knew about maybe leather working or iron working, for the stirrups and different things like that, they kind of combined all that knowledge and then applied it to the horse so they could help domesticate it and ride a horse easier. All right. So that's what it means. You take a knowledge in a certain area and then you apply it somewhere. And you're kind of like building a solution out of the knowledge that you know. Now I want to give you a little bit of an expanded definition. This is a definition from Marshall McLuhan, who is a Canadian philosopher, most famous for his work in the 60s and 70s. But his definition kind of is more like this: any human creation that extends our natural capacity. So any type of creation that helps us do whatever we would naturally do, but do it better or further or more. What I mean is this: most of the time when we think of technology, we usually think of machines. I've got a picture here of a sewing machine and a picture of a smartphone. And so we usually think of some like gadget that can do something for us. And I think that's mostly what we think of when we think of technology. But with Marshall McLuhan's definition, we can actually kind of start expanding a little bit further outside into some more abstract ideas and examples. Here's what I mean. If we think about machine technology, here's an example. You've got a car. Now, what a car does is it expands my ability to move, right? I, as a person, I can walk. And I can walk, I can walk probably for a long time, but I can only walk so fast and I can only walk so far before my legs get tired and I need rest. But if I get into a car, I can go much further, much faster. For instance, if I wanted to walk from Hess Road Wesleyan Church into downtown Lockport, that would take me like the better part of a day is my guess. But if I get into a car and I make that drive, then I will be there in roughly 15 minutes. Okay. So that car is expanding or stretching my natural ability to transport myself. And you could also talk about how planes, expand our ability to transport ourselves, trains, boats, all sorts of other transportation, bicycles, scooters, whatever you want. All of those inventions kind of expand or push out our natural ability for transportation. But here's an example of what I would call a systems technology, the written alphabet. Now, the written alphabet is simply this. It's a set of symbols that represent the sounds of the words that we make. So we've got, you see there, A, B, C. So the sound, B, translates into this little symbol that we call B. And then what we do is we can take all those letters and we can combine them in so many different ways. And that represents our vocal speech, our phonetic speech. And what that systems technology does is that enables us to expand our capacity to communicate. So without a written symbol system, all of our communication would have to be oral. It would have to be with our voices and with our ears. But now somebody can communicate through writing a bunch of these symbols. And you can write books, or you can write signs on the road, and you can do all sorts of different things. So that symbol technology isn't a machine. In fact, you don't need really anything to use it. If you wanted to write the word love in the sand at a beach with your finger, you could do that. You don't need a pen or a pencil, or you don't need paper or any type of technology to use this system. Of course, we do use this system with a bunch of different technologies. We print books and do lots of other things. But the idea is that this systems technology isn't a machine. So some of the things that we create aren't necessarily gadgets, but they're ideas and concepts that kind of impact our entire way of living. So technology is everywhere. It's all around us. And what that means is that because it's all around us, it's important for us as believers to think really hard about what technology is doing and what it does to us and how we use it. And why is that? Well, the reason why is the second part of the title of this class. We've got technology and Christian discipleship. So let's look at the word disciple. Now, this is one that we're all probably familiar with because it gets talked about in church during sermons and during small groups and during Sunday schools. But let's just look at a technical definition here. A disciple is one who accepts and assists in the spreading of the doctrines of another, such as, and their primary example is Christianity, one of the 12 disciples. So the idea here is that if I'm a disciple, what that means is that I have taken on the teachings and ideas of someone else, and I've kind of made them my own, and I'm going to now spread those teachings. I want other people to know about these teachings. I want other people to accept these teachings too. Here's a couple of examples. On the left side of your screen, what you're looking at is a kind of a little picture of something in hockey called the neutral zone trap. Now, what it is, is down at the bottom, you've got those people in blue, the hockey players in blue, and they're going to come out of their zone and they're going to try to go to the other zone and score. Well, what the defense does in the neutral zone trap is they stack everybody up in the neutral zone so that they clog up all the passing lanes and make it really difficult for the opposition to get through to the other side. Now, this type of defense was popular in the 90s, especially by the New Jersey Devils. And so what happened is the New Jersey Devils and a couple of other teams employed this neutral zone trap so well that they were able to win some Stanley Cups with it. The problem is that it made for really boring hockey, and then the NHL eventually changed some rules to make the neutral zone trap pretty difficult to do. So you could be a disciple of the neutral zone trap. You could believe that that is the absolute best way to defend in hockey. And there are other different systems or defense philosophies that you could choose. All right. On the right-hand side of the screen there, you've got Neil Postman. Now, I know he looks a little crazy. He's now deceased, but he is a technology philosopher that I really like. I've read some of his books, and I've been really influenced by the way that he thinks. Now, when he talks about technology and the history of technology, he covers a number of things that are kind of outside of the realm of what the Bible talks about. The Bible doesn't necessarily talk a lot about technology per se. It has some principles for us to follow, and I think we can apply those principles pretty well, but it doesn't necessarily like teach us about the history of technology and what it means and what modern technology is doing to us. Somebody like Neil Postman will write about those things, and he's really influenced me. My job as a disciple is to think about Neil Postman and figure out, well, what in his thinking can line up with the Bible or is at least neutral toward the Bible. And then I can accept that. I'm free to accept that. And then I have to look at Neil Postman and say, well, what doesn't line up with the Bible? And what doesn't line up with the Bible, I have to reject. A good example with him is that he's not a believer. He's not a Christian, and he would probably say that religions are really mostly all just myths, and they kind of help keep society together, but they aren't true in any significant way, and so we don't have to follow them. Well, I would disagree with him on that. So I reject that part of Neil Postman's thinking. And why? Because we are disciples of Jesus Christ. So therefore, every other thing to which we might be discipled must come under the authority of Christ. All right. Christ is asking us to follow him. So whether it's the neutral zone trap, which I don't think is either good or bad morally, or Neil Postman, which I think some of his stuff is really good, and I think some of his stuff I need to reject. So I need to put all those things under the authority of Jesus Christ. And that includes my relationship to technology and technologies. So any type of technology that I use or I engage in, I need to ask hard questions about whether or not I'm using it in a way that glorifies God, or just how my relationship is. Does it draw me closer to Jesus? Does it push me further away from Jesus? Those are the questions that we want to ask. In other words, as we engage in technologies, both old and new, machine and systems, we should scrutinize them to see if they are discipling us away from Jesus or if they are distracting our focus. Now, in some cases, they might not really have any profound impact on us at all as believers. In some cases, they might actually help us spiritually. Right? You might have an app on your phone that's for the Bible, and that is really helpful for you. There are other examples, right? Or you might find that your use of technology is distracting you from Jesus a lot, and maybe we need to make some changes. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Now, what I want to do is cover some theories of technology. We're going to look at theories on a scale. On one end of the scale, on the left side of your screen, is reject all technology. Just get rid of it all. We don't like it. And on the other side, on the right-hand side of your screen, is accept everything. Just every gadget that I can find and every new thing that comes out on the market, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to use it and I'm not going to scrutinize it at all. So those are the two kind of extremes. The most important extreme for us today in America is really probably that accept all extreme. We're more prone to that than we are to just rejecting everything. We don't reject things quite as easily. So we're going to look at those two extremes, and then we're actually going to look at a third way. I want to start with the accept all extreme. And what we're going to call that is transhumanism. Now, that's kind of a fancy name, and there are a bunch of different names that I could come up with here. But I've chosen transhumanism because what I want to emphasize for you is that accept all mentality has a philosophical kind of grounding to it that we don't always think about, but is kind of there. Let's dive in. What is transhumanism? And here I'm going to come at you again with a definition. This is again from Oxford. The belief or theory that the human race can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations, especially by means of science and technology. So, what's going on in transhumanism is this. Most transhumanists are going to be evolutionary, they're going to believe in evolution, natural evolution, without God involved at all. And they're going to say that we are kind of on a process now of moving. We've been human beings for however long, and now we're at a point where we're going to start moving into something new, something a little bit different. And the main way that we're going to do that is through science and new technologies. So our new technologies are going to make us into essentially a new species. Let's dive into what that looks like. And in order to dive in, we're going to look at something called the Transhumanist Declaration. This was drafted by a group of transhumanist thinkers in 1998 and then updated in 2009. And you can find it on the website Humanity Plus, and that's humanity with a plus sign. Now, what I'm going to do is there are eight like points, 8 things that they have. I'm going to read through them, and then what we're going to do is we're going to make some comments about what they mean and how they might work a little bit in our society today. Let's begin. Number 1, humanity stands to be profoundly affected by science and technology in the future. We envision the possibility of broadening human potential by overcoming aging, cognitive shortcomings, involuntary suffering, and our confinement to planet Earth. So what these transhumanists are saying is that we're on the cusp. We're at this moment where we're going to be profoundly altered by science and technology. And what that's going to do is we're going to be able to overcome aging, our cognitive shortcomings. We're going to see that go away. We're also going to see physical suffering go away, and we might even be living on a different planet. Maybe we're living on the moon or on Mars or something like that. 2, we believe that all humanity's potential is mostly unrealized. There are possible scenarios that lead to wonderful and exceedingly worthwhile enhanced human conditions. So all they're saying here is that we've got a lot of potential. And there are some scenarios where we could do some really great things. That seems, if you're a transhumanist, that's a pretty optimistic outlook. Number 3, and this is where the transhumanists start to get a little bit more realistic, in my opinion. We recognize that humanity faces serious risks, especially from the misuse of new technologies. There are possible realistic scenarios that lead to the loss of most or even all of what we hold valuable. Some of these scenarios are drastic, others are subtle. Although all progress is change, not all change is progress. I actually like that last line quite a bit. But what they're saying here is, remember, in point 2, there are possible scenarios that are wonderful and will take us a long way. Now in point 3, they're admitting that, well, there's also some risks here. We can misuse our technologies, and if we misuse them really badly, we might come up with some scenarios that are awful, that are just horrible. So we've got to be aware of that. So then what they say is in point 4, research effort needs to be invested into understanding these prospects. We need to carefully deliberate how best to reduce risks and expedite beneficial applications. We also need forums where people can constructively discuss what should be done and a social order where responsible decisions can be implemented. So now what they're saying is that because there are both risks and possible rewards, we need to make some effort into kind of evaluating those risks and rewards. So research needs to be focused on this. We've got to deliberate. We've got to try to reduce those risks. We like places where people can discuss this stuff, and like all of our ideas can be put out on the table, and we can be responsible. Now, to me, that's like a really tall order, given that humanity is generally not very responsible. All right. But they recognize that there's a need to deliberate, there's a need to be careful, a need to be responsible. So that is good that they do recognize that. Number 5, reduction of existential risks and development of means for the preservation of life and health. the alleviation of grave suffering, and the improvement of human foresight and wisdom should be pursued as urgent priorities and heavily funded. So all this really means is that we should give a lot of money to these new technologies, and we should give a lot of money to these forums that will help us decide how to use the technologies. 6, policy making ought to be guided by responsible and inclusive moral vision, taking seriously both opportunities and risks, respecting autonomy and individual rights, and showing solidarity with and concern for the interests and dignity of all people around the globe. We must also consider our moral responsibilities towards generations that will exist in the future. So what they want now is, now that they've got these forums, now that they've got everything heavily funded, when we make policies, we want to take those risks and opportunities really seriously. We want to respect individual rights, but also kind of like be concerned for each other. And we got to consider our responsibility towards generations in the future. Now, I think that's actually pretty good. Those tensions are hard to keep in place, but I think that's a pretty good ideal. Now, moving on to number 7 and 8. 7, we advocate the well-being of all sentients, including humans, non-human animals, and any future artificial intellects, modified life forms, or other intelligences to which technological and scientific advance may give rise. So what they want is, we really wish the well-being of like every living thing. Animals, humans, and also artificial intelligences or anything else that we might come up with that might look like a person or look like they have consciousness or anything like that. So finally, 8, we favor allowing individuals wide personal choice over how they enable their lives. This includes use of techniques that may be developed to assist memory, concentration, and mental energy, life extension therapies, reproductive choice technologies, cryonics procedures, and many other possible human modification and enhancement technologies. So basically what they're saying here now is, we've got all this responsibility in the world, we've got all this funding, we've got all this great policy making decision going on. Now, this to me is a real pie in the sky scenario, but once we have that in place, then individuals are allowed a wide personal choice over the types of technologies that they're going to use. They might choose to, have some mechanism or machine that helps them memorize things or remember things. They might decide to cryogenically freeze their bodies and wake up in 200 years. They might also choose to edit the genes of their potential baby, okay? And we're going to give everybody kind of the freedom to do that. So if we wanted to distill all of this declaration, let's look at some possible goals of transhumanism. We want to maximize our bodily potential. And what we really want to do is kind of like move it beyond what we can currently do. Maximize mind potential. In other words, transhumanists recognize that our minds corrode over time. Our memory isn't as good. Our ability to perceive and understand isn't as good as we get older. I'm not really looking forward to that, but I know that it will happen. And we also want to avoid death. Like, we want to be able to prolong the actual lifespan of human beings, or, the new humans, the new species, the post-humans, and maybe we won't die at all. Okay. Underlying assumptions. In transhumanism, the underlying assumption is this: that technology is the means of progress. In other words, how we're going to get this great cognition, how we're going to avoid aging, how we're going to kind of like improve our physical suffering is going to be technology. We're going to build new machines and things that will help us do this. Technological advancement is therefore good and to be desired. In other words, we want to grab those technologies. We just want to keep developing new things as much as we humanly can, because these are going to assist us in all these goals. So now humans can move beyond the current state of humanity into something else. Post-humanity, post-humans. We might look something like RoboCop here. Okay? So transhumanism is this. In a lot of ways, what's happening is human beings are taking control of our evolutionary destiny by means of technology. That's what we're doing. And we actually have some choice in how we are going to evolve. Philosophy of transhumanism typically has a denial of the supernatural. Now, we'll get to that exception in a minute, but most of the time they're going to deny the supernatural. They're going to believe in naturalistic evolution, evolutionary theory by random chance, and things like that. Ethics and meaning. So moral, like what we believe morally and the meaning of our lives are determined by progress and reason. So in other words, the meaning of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing is actually going to be determined not by philosophy or religion or theology or God. It's going to be determined by what new technologies we have, okay, and our ability to reason. There's an emphasis on perpetual progress. So transhumanists are very positive that all of this technology will help us to move forward. There will be no moving backward. Now, I realize in the transhumanist declaration they do point out that there are risks and there are potential really bad things that could happen. But generally speaking, transhumanists are looking to technology to move us forward. Self-determinism, we've hit on this already, but we will be the ones who determine how we evolve. And so there's just this broad optimism about technology. In other words, there's almost an accept all technology. Like if we can make it, well, then we should. If we can do that thing, then we just ought to do it. There's not as much clear ethics involved in the transhumanist project. So, transhumanism does not predict or know when we will reach a post-human state, but we are in the process of working toward it. That's one important thing to know about transhumanism, is that people who kind of believe in this philosophy, they can't tell you exactly what we will look like, and they don't know when we would turn over into a new post-human species. But they do believe very strongly that we're moving in that direction. Now, so far we've been talking about transhumanism, we've been talking about like philosophy, and it's way high up in the sky. But right now there are actually some practical things that we might think about. Now, as I read this quote here, I don't want you to think I'm being hyper negative about everything in this quote, but let's just look at it here. They, the transhumanists, this is Dorcas Cheng Tozen in his article, The Imago Dei Meets Superhuman Potential, and this is quoted in Jacob Schatzer's Transhumanism in the Image of God. They, transhumanists, are dedicating billions of dollars and the greatest minds in science and engineering to develop a range of human-enhancing innovations. Virtual reality promises to transport us anywhere. Wearable devices put us closer to connecting the human brain to the digital cloud. Genome editing allows us to design our babies and cure any disease or disability up to and including death itself. Now, what Dorcas Changtozen means is that even some of the technologies that we use today, like really basic things, like I've used virtual reality before. It's been a while since it's been like 5 or 6 years since I've used any type of virtual reality. So the stuff I was using was pretty crude, and it might be better now. But the idea here is that we've got this system that is designed to like transport us wherever we want to go. And virtual reality technologies will only get sharper and better and more immersive over time. So we're already kind of in that point where we can start moving ourselves out of wherever we actually are. Genome editing is a great example of we can cheat disease and we can cheat deformity by using genome editing, possibly. We want to make sure that our children don't have this disease or this genetic, like a lot of diseases and conditions, medical conditions are passed down through heredity. Well, with this genome editing, we could say, well, I want to make sure that my kid doesn't have dyslexia or that my kid doesn't have, diabetes or whatever it is. So we can actually cheat our way out of death through this type of thing. So most Christians would not be openly transhumanists. Okay. There are actually some Christians who are transhumanists in nature. Or not in nature, that's a silly thing to say. They believe in transhumanism. They really do think that God is more controlling the process, though. They would probably say that we are on the cusp of moving forward in evolutionary ways, but they would say that God is kind of controlling that. But nonetheless, we may still take a high level of tech acceptance. So even though you and me are probably not transhumanists, we still might take on kind of some of those underlying ideas that new technology is good and new technology is always going to be helpful. It's always going to make my life easier and better. And so we just kind of accept. And as Christians, we actually have some good reasons for that. Within the church, tech can help draw in new and younger people to the church. So, for instance, when I lived in Asheville, Asheville is a city with a lot of transients, and the main way that that church would find new people to come in is they had a really good website. So Olivia and I, when we moved there, that's exactly what we did. In order to find churches, we went online and we kind of searched, well, what are some of the local churches in our area? And we found, we went to a bunch of other churches first, a few other churches first, but eventually we landed on their website and we tried them out and we eventually kept going there. It was kind of that their ability to use technology well kind of got us in the door, so to speak. And tech may also offer us new paths to share the gospel, right? We might get online and share the gospel with our friend on Facebook or in a chat room or something like that. Or we can make videos that we can send across the world, and those videos can contain the gospel message. So our technology can enhance our ability to spread the gospel message, and it can enhance our ability to bring people into the church sometimes. So we do have sometimes good reasons for embracing new technology. On the opposite end, okay, there's that accept all. On the opposite end, there's the Luddite. Now, the Luddite is a reject all. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because most of us aren't rejectors, all right? So the Luddite movement happened in 1811 in Nottingham, England. Textile workers revolted in protest of new machinery that was replacing their jobs. As a part of their protest, they destroyed machinery in the new textile factories. Many Luddites owned textile workshops and were being pushed out by factories that could make more product for less money in less time. Does this sound familiar? Absolutely. We're still dealing with these problems today as we look at companies using more automation in everyday life, everywhere from like Walmart having self-checkout areas to factories using more advanced machine technologies to do the jobs that factory workers have historically done. So this is not a new idea, but what happened with the Luddites is they just said, well, let's destroy that technology. Let's break it up. And then these guys won't be able to do their work in the factory and we'll be able to, sell our textiles from our workshops. Right? The movement lasted for a while and then it kind of fizzled out. But today, when we use that term Luddite, what we mean is it has since come to refer to anyone or maybe a group who just rejects new technologies. Extreme forms of Luddite behavior might include like some survivalist people who go out into the mountains and they throw out their TVs and their radio and they just kind of like pack up on food and supplies, and they know how to hunt and they know how to live off the land, and they've got their shelter, and they're not going to involve themselves with the rest of the world, and they're not going to involve themselves with technologies. Now, that's one example. You might also look at the Amish. The Amish do use technologies. They just refuse a lot of modern machine technologies, such as cars, and also digital technologies, such as smartphones and things like that. Okay, they do use some tools and other rudimentary technologies. So, Luddites, the other extreme, there are just not too many people that are modern day Luddites. Some of us, however, are slow adapters, or we don't use that new technology very quickly. We don't reject the new technologies out of hand, but they might just be slow to pick up on them. An example might be for me, when I started using a cell phone shortly after I got married to Olivia in 2004. In 2007, smartphones came out, and I didn't get one right away. In fact, I didn't get one until 2015. I really held off for a long time, and then it was kind of like a big deal when I made that transition. And I know other people who have gone longer. I know Pastor Matthew didn't get his smartphone until 2019. So then there are other people who might even still be using flip phones, and that's probably a good thing. So sometimes even though we don't like reject those technologies, we're slow to pick them up. All right, that's Luddites, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time on them. Now what I want to do is I want to look at a third way, and this way is going to be called Christian discernment. You might have noticed up to this point in my presentation that I haven't really used scripture a lot. And that's because there aren't really a lot of passages that say, this is how you should use your smartphone, or this is what you should do with a hammer, or whatever. Technology is not a subject that gets talked about in really explicit or systematic categorical ways in scripture, but there are underlying principles within scripture that we can look at that will help us. Here's one. This is Paul speaking in Philippians 1, 9 through 11. Here he says, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." So let's just break this down really quickly. Paul has a prayer. That prayer is that their love may abound and they might have more knowledge and depth of insight. So he wants these Philippian people to have more knowledge, so they're a learning people. He wants their insight to be full of depth. Okay, so not only do they know a lot of stuff, but they're thoughtful, essentially. And he wants that to be kind of cloaked or surrounded by love. And the reason for this is so that they can discern what is best. And in discerning what is best, they will be able to be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. All right. So that's what, and what he means by that is when Jesus returns, when he comes in judgment. So discernment is the ability to judge well. So he wants them to have this love and this knowledge and this depth of insight so that they can judge well, so that they can be pure and blameless before Jesus. Here's an example of discernment. I'm going to use college romance. So let's say you are a freshman college girl and you go to college and you've never had a boyfriend before, and you're like, okay, I'm free and I want to have romance now, right? When I went to two Bible colleges. I went to Bethany Bible College and Moody Bible College, and both of them had the nickname Bethany Bridal College and Moody Bible College, right? So the idea was, in Christian circles especially, you go to college and you're really expected to find your mate. All right. So let's say you're a freshman girl, you've never had a boyfriend before, but you're really excited to date or to meet the one that you're going to marry, right? And let's say you meet this guy. This is the first guy you meet, and you say, okay, I'll date you because you like me. Is that very discerning? No, not really. This is Sean Penn from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I can't recommend that movie, but if you've ever seen it, and I've seen it like 20 years ago or so, and he's a burnout stoner, he's not really like going anywhere, right? He's not a guy you want to date because that's probably not going to turn out really well. So that girl would not be very discerning. Instead, what she should do is she should choose this guy. All right. Yeah, this is a picture of me when I was 23 years old. So she should choose that guy. That guy's responsible. He's loving. He's cool. He's fun. He's smart. Whatever. All right. Choose that guy. Don't choose Sean Penn from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But we want to be a people of discernment. So we do not just reject out of hand, and we don't just accept out of hand. In other words, we're trying not to just be reactionary, right? Don't just accept, don't just reject. Instead, we test our relationship with technology to see how it helps or hurts us as we walk with Jesus. In other words, we do that scrutinizing process. So we look at that device that we want to buy or that we have, and we ask, what is it doing to me? What does it do, period? And then what does it do to me? Things like that. So testing our technology, what does that mean? We put it under scrutiny, we make an assessment, and we figure out what we need to work on. An example for me was when I became a Christian. When I first became a Christian, I was 16 years old, and I had been a pretty big video game nerd. I played a lot of video games. And as I became a Christian in my early walk with Jesus, eventually, maybe like a year into being a Christian or so, I can't remember exactly, I realized that I was playing video games so much that it was really distracting me from my walk with Jesus. And I'm not here to say that video games are bad. I'm just saying that in my situation, I was playing them way, 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 way too much. And so what I did is I actually got rid of my Super Nintendo. I just flat out got rid of it because it was distracting me. I had to put that under scrutiny and be willing to say, yeah, this isn't good. And then I had to make an assessment. And the assessment was, bad. Okay. And then I had to say, well, what do I need to do? And I decided what I needed to do was just get rid of it. So, what we can do when we approach this issue of discernment is we can ask 4 questions. And the questions I have here are from Jay Kim and his book, Analog Church. So, question number 1 is when we're looking at a technology, we ask, what does it enhance, improve, or make possible? In other words, kind of like what benefits does it bring? What does it push aside or make obsolete? In the case of like the Luddites, what that new machine technology in the textile industry pushed aside the skilled laborers and craftsmen that in their workshops. Okay, what does technology? Thinking about technology again, what does it retrieve that was previously pushed aside or made obsolete? We're actually going to see maybe an example of that in a moment. But 4, what does it turn into when pushed to an extreme? In other words, if you look back at my Super Nintendo example, my video game example, I don't think it's bad to play video games. In fact, I do play video games some now as an adult. Not a lot, but some. And what was happening to me is I took a technology that wasn't inherently bad, but I was pushing it to an extreme, playing it so much that it was actually a negative impact on my spiritual life. Here's an example we're also going to work with from Jay Kim, the hymnal and the projector. The hymnal and the projector are both technologies, okay? And we're going to analyze just for a moment how those technologies have impacted us in the church. Here is a picture of some people reading or singing with hymn books. Now, in my class, I gave everybody a couple moments to say, well, what do you notice about this? What are they doing? What are they not doing? If you want to ask those questions for yourself, you can hit pause right now and kind of look and think. Now, what I notice here is that everybody is looking down. Okay, and we could talk about whether that's good or bad, but everybody's looking down, and we can see that everybody is on the same page. That dude in the pink shirt in the back, he's not looking down, so I don't know what's going on with him. Maybe he's an unbeliever. All right, so everybody's looking down. We can notice that the light is natural. It's a very bright room. So those are some good things that we can see, or at least some good observations that we can make. Now let's look at some pros and cons of the hymnal. A pro is that it gives the church a larger selection of songs. If you pick up any hymnal from any denominational tradition, you're going to find roughly 400 songs that you can choose from. That's a lot. All right, so it gives you a variety. If you're using a hymnal, everyone is going to sing the same tune, especially if everyone knows how to read music. So in the heyday of the hymnal, when everybody was using them and we learned how to read music maybe in our schools a little bit more. We don't do that as much now. But we learned how to read music in our schools. Everybody knew how to do it, so you'd be on tune. Even if you weren't a good singer, you'd at least be on tune. And everyone sings the same words. You might have noticed that every once in a while at Hess Road, especially in the early service, there will be like some faux pas with the words that we're singing. What'll be up on the projector is different from what's being sung from up front, which might be a little bit different from what the people down in the congregation are singing. But if you're all looking at the exact same hymnal, then you all should be saying the same words. A couple of cons here. Our gaze is downward. We notice that in that picture. So what that means is that I'm not really looking up. I'm maybe not as aware of my surroundings. Now, that's not perfect. I use a hymnal I've used them in the past, and I look up from my hymnal after a little while sometimes, or in between verses or whatever. But generally, our gaze is downward. The other thing is that it doesn't leave much opportunity for physical worship. I know some of you like to raise your hands and things like that in the service or kind of move about a little bit. But if you got that hymnal in your hand, that type of thing becomes more difficult to do. So before the hymnal came in, you might be more likely to express yourself physically. But after the hymnal comes in, it's going to be harder to do. But then when the hymnal goes away, you might have a little bit more freedom. And we'll see that in just a moment. Let's talk about the projector. Here's a people or some worship leaders using a projector, and they're actually using a hymn. They're singing a hymn right there. Now, if you want to pause right now and just try to make some mental observations about what you see, you can. But what I'm going to point out here is that this is a dark room. Okay, this is a room where there's not a lot of the lighting is all focused in on that band. There's colored lighting. Okay, we got a lot of red here and some hints of blue, and they're all up on that stage, and it's really focused on them. Okay, there's not a lot of natural light happening in this picture. Overhead projector, or an overhead projector that uses slides, or in our case, like a regular projector. A pro would be that our gaze is going to be upward. Okay, we're not going to be staring down at a book. We can have more opportunity to look around the congregation and feel like we're a part of a group that's worshiping God together. And we can look upward and maybe even have some time and space to look at the possible architecture of the building. If it's interesting architecture, we can do some things like that. More physical worship is possible. We've already talked about that. So you're not holding the hymnal. That means you can raise your hands. And you don't have to supply or update hymnals. Okay. So if you're using a projector, you really have the freedom to put any song you want up on that projector. You don't have to buy new hymn books. A con, the songbook is generally going to be focused mostly on modern music. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. And we've sung some hymns in our second service, I know. But generally speaking, as people move away from the hymn book, they tend to move away from the hymns. And they're only singing like the very newest songs. It also pushes churches to create darker spaces. If you want to maximize the potential of a projector, you need to be in a dark space. This is why movie theaters are dark. This is why whenever they show a movie in a park somewhere, they wait until like 9 or 10 o'clock or whatever, after it's really dark. Because when there's that natural light, it diminishes the ability of the projector to perform. So a lot of churches, especially larger churches, have opted to turn off all the lights, shut out all the natural light, and make sure that we have a dark space so that projector can really perform. And then we shine all of our lights on the band, and it becomes a little bit more of a rock concert, a little bit more of an entertainment type thing. I'm in the dark now. I maybe can't see people next to me as well. It makes it a little bit more privatized, and then I'm looking up at the band and I'm focusing on them. So that might be a con with the projector. Now, all I want to do with this exercise is just point out, not that projectors are bad or hymnals are good or hymnals are bad and projectors are good. I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other or good or bad. All I want to demonstrate is that our technologies actually shape how we worship a little bit. They kind of give us some boundaries and parameters. They make some things easier and some things more difficult. So we're going to maybe improve in one way, but we're going to kind of not improve, deprove. I don't know. We're gonna lose some things in some other areas. Now, what I want to do to finish this up is talk about two principles. These are some principles that we really need to know when we are talking about technology, because we always have a device in our hand or a machine that we're using or a system that we're employing to help us out as we go along. Here's the two principles. Principle one, technology is not neutral. What I mean actually is not technology in general, but what I mean is that every single piece of technology is not neutral. Whatever you hold in your hand, whatever tool you are using has certain capacities and then certain things that they just can't do. Here's an example here. Technology is designed with function in mind. Every time an inventor sets down and makes a new thing, What they're trying to do is perform a certain function. Here's my example. What are you supposed to do with a rake? You can pause here if you want. But generally, we rake leaves, right? You might, grab something from underneath your deck that fell underneath there. Or there might be a couple of other interesting purposes that you could use. I know some people talked about you use a rake to put hot dogs on them and, cook your hot dogs over the fire, right? You can do some things like that. But generally, a long stick or pole with these kind of like spokes that come out and then come down in almost like a claw, those are designed to rake up leaves. You might rake pebbles, like the Japanese gardens, they rake their stones and stuff like that. But the purpose is limited. Can I sweep my house with a rake? No. Can I call my mom with a rake? No. There's a lot of things I can't do with a rake. Even though I might get a little bit creative, there is a specific function in mind with a rake. And that's why you really only see them, you see them advertise a lot more like when it's about to be fall, and then they go on sale when fall is over, right? So not everything we create is great. So if, and we're saying here that technology is not neutral, it has a particular function in mind. The next step is to recognize that not everything we make is actually good. There are some inventions that are just not good. Now, I don't think there are very many inventions that are like pure negative evil, but there are some. And even the good things we make can be misused and are misused. Let's look at some examples. Not everything is great. This is Robert Oppenheimer. You might know who he is. He was the lead of the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he helped to design the atomic bomb. He was one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, and he did design that atomic bomb, and they got it to work, obviously, and our military used it. And what happened is after we used it on Japan, Oppenheimer spent the second half of his career, or a good portion of the second half of his career, trying to convince people of the need for nuclear disarmament. He really felt that this invention just simply, it shouldn't exist. We should not have this kind of capacity for mass death and destruction. I mean, it's really instantaneous genocide is what it is. He felt that the technology itself was designed to kill at a massive scale was such that we just shouldn't access it. Now, he didn't win that battle, okay? Countries have nuclear weapons. We have a lot of nuclear weapons. Nobody was ever convinced. And in some ways, Oppenheimer turned out to be wrong. We haven't really used nuclear weapons since then. And I think that's mostly because of what we call mutually assured destruction. Sometimes we get scared that North Korea is going to get a nuclear weapon, and it would certainly help them from a foreign policy standpoint. But the reality is that if they chose to use that weapon, chances are it would just end in their total destruction. Other nations would come after them. Same with Iran or some other rogue nations that want to get nuclear weapons. So we tend, even though we have these weapons, to not use them anymore because we know that it's not really a good idea. All right. So that's one example of a technology that is just not great. And I would agree, even though mutually assured destruction has helped us out, I don't really think that nuclear weapons are a good thing. All right. Even good things can be misused. Here's the baseball bat. All right. The people who design and make baseball bats don't just give us sticks of wood. They whittle that wood down so that at the bottom end, it's really small and narrow so that it can be held by hands. And there's even a knob at the bottom to help it not slip out of our hands. And then the barrel is larger so that the ball, when it hits the ball will jump off of it more and go further. Right. So a baseball bat is designed with that specific function. And that's a good function. It's fine. Baseball, I don't like baseball as a sport, but there's nothing wrong with hitting a baseball. Now, what you can do, this is a picture of Double Dragon, an old video game. And what you can see there is one guy has a baseball bat in his hand. And he's walking through what looks like a factory. And he's going to beat up some people with that baseball bat. Right? So even though a baseball bat is designed to hit a baseball, We can use it to hit a person. All right. So, do most baseball bats get used to hit people? No. Most of them get used to hit baseballs. But what we want to see here is that even our most benign technologies can be used for wicked things. And every technology can be taken to an extreme. You may have heard this phrase, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What we can do is sometimes when we have a certain technology in our hands, we decide that we have to use it. We have to use it for everything, right? And we're just kind of looking for a way to use it because we've got it. And that's not good, right? So technology is not neutral. Everything is designed with function in mind. Some technologies are simply not good. Even good technologies can be misused, and every technology can be taken to an extreme. That's our first principle. We want to recognize that technologies do have specific functionality, but that we can be creative in how we use them, and we don't always use them good. Or that was bad. We don't always use them well, and we can take them to extremes. Our second principle is this, and here's where we'll wrap up. We shape technology, and technology shapes us. We saw a little bit of that in our example of the projector in the hymnal. I'd like now to talk about two historic technologies that have changed our world, and I want to talk about how it has done that. Example number one, the refrigerator. Now, this one's a little bit more benign, okay, but it'll be fun. So, a brief history of refrigerators. Ice boxes packed with snow or placed near freshwater lakes provided what we might call refrigeration. This would be natural refrigeration. An early attempt at mechanical refrigeration came with Scottish inventor William Cullen in 1755, but he really couldn't find a way to practically apply it. Then a number of other attempts were made over the next 100 years. And then in 1854, James Harrison from Australia invented refrigeration technology that could be used in commercial settings. And it was used in breweries and in meat packing houses. It couldn't be used for home use because the ammonia and sulfur that was used in these large-scale industrial refrigerators would occasionally leak, and so it wasn't safe. But the first home use refrigerator came around 1915. Now, at first, they were expensive and they weren't as safe as you would probably want them to be, but they were available if you had the money and you were willing to take the risk. But home units over the next 15 years, they got safer and more affordable. And by the 1930s, prices drop and Freon 12 makes them safer. And so in the 30s, you really start to see families buying up refrigerators, and it becomes much more normal to have a personal refrigerator in your home. So when we think about the personal refrigerator in my home, this is an invention that has this mass use, less than 100 years, really. Now, the first ones came in 1915, but they weren't widely used. So we've only had wide use for about 90 years at this point. What would we do without refrigeration? Well, we couldn't go to the grocery store just once a week, or some of us only go once a month, right? When we buy food, we'd have to eat it quickly because we wouldn't have anywhere to store it that would be safe. We would have a milkman if we didn't have refrigerators. Right, I buy a thing of milk and I can put it in that refrigerator, and it takes us, however long, a few days, whatever, to go through it. But I couldn't do that if I didn't have a refrigerator. I'd have to have a milkman come and bring me milk every day. Freezers, this is a little bit of a step up. Freezers enable processed food in long-term storage. So all that processed food that we Americans eat, that's really because we have freezers. It's just a really cold refrigerator, basically, right? So these are some things that if we didn't have refrigeration, we would not have some of the conveniences that we do have today. How does the refrigerator change our relationship with food? Well, transportation of foods from far away. So you can be in Omaha, Nebraska, and you can have shrimp. No need for ice delivery. Some of you might remember the Iceman coming down the road and you get your block of ice, and that helps you to refrigerate your food. We have less of a need for root cellars and things like that for our vegetables, and we can plan way ahead. Olivia and I do this. We buy food, we buy meat, especially if it's on sale, and then we freeze it. So we might buy a big spiral ham and we put it in the freezer and we wait, and then, maybe a month later or even 2 or 3 months later, we say, oh yeah, we've got that ham in the freezer. Let's pull that out, defrost it, and make it. We can do that. We would never have been able to do that without refrigerators and freezers. We have a lot more energy consumption because of our refrigerators and freezers. They take up on average 1/6 of our home's energy consumption. We risk losing food when power goes out or your kids mess with the knobs, right? A recent example is that I went on vacation with my in-laws, and we spent part of it in Myrtle Beach, and then we went back to my in-laws' house in Charlotte. And when we returned from Myrtle Beach, they discovered that whoever had used the freezer last had left it open a little bit. And so all that food that was in that freezer was spoiled. And they lost hundreds of dollars of food. And overall, this is actually, I think, the biggest thing. Overall, freezers and refrigeration kind of disconnect us from how food is processed. Because we go to the grocery store and we get a little package that has some ground beef, right? Or chicken that's already, sliced up and diced up in just the perfect way in a little package. And we often don't think about the fact that, like, this is an animal and it had to be butchered. And so we have less of a connection to the way where our food comes from and what our food actually is. In some ways it can almost feel like magical that we walk into a grocery store and we just buy this stuff. Now, here is a video. I'm just going to play this for you really quick. This is from 1926, and this is a silent advertisement for refrigerators. Buy an electric refrigerator. There's a picture of a refrigerator here. Now, this is silent because in 1926, they didn't have sound in movie theaters. An electric refrigerator provides convenience and comfort, safeguards health, and is a real economy. See all makes at the Refrigerator Show. 933 Liberty Avenue, April 5th to 19th, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., admission free, the Electric League of Pittsburgh. So in 1926, you would only see an advertisement at a movie theater, either before or maybe in between movies. And so what happens here is in this ad, we've got some things that it wants to emphasize. Hold on here. There we go. That ad emphasizes food safety. Now, that's a super practical thing, right? You can refrigerate your food and it's not going to grow the bacteria and it'll last longer and stuff like that. But the things that advertisement really gets at, in my mind, is that it's more convenient. And we've talked about how refrigerators make our lives more convenient. It offers us some comfort. It's always comforting to me to know that I can go up there and get a snack of cheese or whatever at late night. And it's an economy. It saves us some money. And here's a picture of what the inside of a refrigerator might look like. This is actually a painting from a friend of mine named Andrew Leventis in Charlotte, North Carolina. So when we look at these items here, convenience, comfort, and economy, especially those three things are really kind of the selling point for most of the technologies that we use. We build technologies to make our lives more convenient, more comfortable, more thrifty, right? And so that to me is symbolic of technology in general, how we think about it and use it. So we shaped refrigeration and then refrigeration shapes us. So what I mean here is we invented refrigeration in order to maximize convenience, comfort, and economy. In turn, refrigeration has shaped how we eat, what we eat, how we think about food, and it's really just determined a lot of our diet. So that invention kind of moved beyond its initial intention is actually shaped a lot of what we eat and how we think about food. Example number 2, we'll get through this and then we'll wrap up. This is the mechanical clock. Clock comes from the Latin clocca, which just means bell. So it refers to, and the original clocks would have a bell, original mechanical clocks would. Now, before we even get into this, here's what I want to show you, because I think this is really important. Neil Postman, who's that guy that I talked about earlier, what he said is that it is not possible to contain the effects of a new technology to a limited sphere of human activity. What he means by that is this. We often invent something and we have a specific purpose in mind. And we've talked about this some already. But we invent it with a specific purpose or to solve a certain problem. But after a while, that invention will kind of grow in ways that maybe we didn't necessarily expect. And it can do things that we didn't plan on. And the clock is actually going to be a really good example of this. So, early development of the mechanical clock. Now, we're not talking about sundials or anything like that. We're talking about something that would have gears, maybe could be wound up, things like that, used weights, a mechanical clock. Developed in the 1200s by Catholic monks who wanted to keep their devotional hours with more precision. So, basically, they wanted to pray on time. They just wanted to keep better order for when they prayed. By the 1300s, the mechanical clock starts to move out of the monasteries and into the town square. And this is all in Europe, where it began to regulate the growing mercantile industry in Europe and other businesses. So, what happens now is initially the clock is there to help regulate prayer. Now it starts regulating business and commerce in a new way. At this point, a clock would only tell the hour. So you wouldn't tell somebody to show up at 9:30. It would be 9 or 10, right? So the regulation of time is pretty broad and general at this point. And here's an example of a town hall or a town square that might have a clock. This is Hill Valley, California, 1955. Lightning struck this particular town hall clock. You might remember that from Back to the Future. Anyway, then in 1370, there's a major transition. Charles V, he's a French king, orders all clocks in Paris to be synchronized to the royal palace clock. So up to this point, a monastery might have their clock synchronized one way, the town square might have it synchronized another. There weren't a lot of clocks in homes necessarily, but businesses might have them and things like that. And clocks weren't synchronized perfectly. What Charles V wanted is everybody to be on the same exact time, always, everywhere, in all of Paris. And Paris is a big city. So we've got the mass regulation of time. Now, the church's original aim, which was to regulate prayer hours, becomes subverted to the needs of the larger community, and especially of business, commerce, and government. So the churches now and the monasteries would have to synchronize their clocks up with what's going on at the royal palace. And then what happens, another big transition is in the 1580s, minutes and seconds are added, and a 24-hour period is adopted in the West. Now, I want to point out here, we live and breathe the 24-hour day. It's like air to us. It's all we've ever known. But the reality is that the 24-hour period, or that way of dividing up time, is a human invention. In fact, in the 1790s in France, in Revolutionary era France, there were some people who really tried to make a decimal timekeeping system. So what they wanted is a day that would be made up of 10 hours. Each hour would be 100 minutes. Each minute would be 100 seconds. And they tried and tried and tried, and it never really caught on. And so we have this 24-hour period now. But I want us to understand that even that is a system of dividing up our days. And it's not something that's just natural. Like God did not invent the 24-hour period. We divided up night and day, morning and evening, dawn, dusk, etc. We divided that up into these like little bits of time. And now the wristwatch comes along in 1868. The first one is invented in Switzerland. There's actually a little bit of debate about that, but we're going to go with the Switzerland one. And in 2015, you get the Apple Watch. It's produced. And clocks are now commonplace everywhere. Homes have them. Your computer has them. Your smartphone will have them. I've got a clock here on the wall in my office as I'm doing this program right now. So clocks are just now everywhere. Here's what Craig Gay says from Modern Technology and the Human Future. This is a really interesting quote. Modern men and women typically complain that they are relentlessly driven by their schedules, appointments, timetables, and agendas. In the last century, Western visitors to the Philippines were described by the Filipino people as people with gods on their wrists. So what the Filipino people recognized was that these Westerners who came over, they were constantly looking at their watch to see what time it is. And they got to be here as soon as this watch tells me to be there, right? So they were controlled or dominated by the clock. Their whole lives were ordered by the clock. So what we can see is that this thing that was originally meant to regulate prayer time has now regulated everything. And that might not always be good. So there is an opportunity for Christian discernment when it comes to time. And we can't get away from the 24-hour time period. And we're not going to get away from clocks in general. But we can ask ourselves some good questions. To what degree do we allow the clock to control our lives? Does the clock clutter our lives and distract us from God? Are we always so busy that we can never sit down and rest with God or contemplate things? How can we use the clock to glorify God? We're going to have the clock. We're going to have that 24-hour period. So how can we control the clock and not the clock control us? And as we control the clock, how do we do that in a way that glorifies God? And are we flexible with time? Can we engage patiently with cultures that view time differently? This was a thing for me when I went to Bolivia. Now, I lived in La Paz, which is a pretty industrialized area, and you certainly have to have regulated times for things like movies and stuff like that, business. But socially speaking, the Bolivian people, you don't show up necessarily exactly at 8 o'clock at night. You might show up at 9:30, and that's okay culturally for them. So can I be flexible? Am I more bound to my idea of time and punctuality than I am bound to the people that I knew in Bolivia? It's an important question for me to ask when I was a missionary. As disciples of Jesus, we have a chance to examine and scrutinize the technology around us. We can ask how it shapes our lives and whether or not it directs us to Jesus. In other words, we are to be a people of discernment. So my challenge is for us to look at our technologies and to really start thinking hard about how they interact with us as disciples. Now, there's some homework here. If you're watching just to catch up, you might not have time or even the ability to do this. I'm going to go to the next slide, and then you can feel free to pause it if you like. And this will show you what you have to do for homework. And if you have any questions about the homework, you can feel free to contact me. All right, here's that homework. One page, due next Wednesday. Pick a technology and ask the following questions. Here's a list of technologies on the right-hand side of the screen. If you want to do your own, if you think of a technology different from this list and you want to do that, go ahead. That would be awesome. All right, that is the condensed version of the first part of my 101 on technology and Christian discipleship. Thank you for listening.